Homework go.
Good.
Easy?
Yep.
Too easy?
Relatively easy.
It was a lot easier. It was easier than merge sort.
How could it be easier in merge sort?
Merge sort
Merge
was
sort's like
rough.
trivial.
Merge sort sucks.
Rough.
All right, so first of all, what were we supposed to do? We're supposed to roll the dice, was it 10,000 times?
Yeah.
And then we had to count up the number of rolls we had for each thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so and was it just a 20-sided die?
Yeah, just 20-sided.
All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll just create our 20-sided die here. We can see this. Can somebody hit the third button down, Brody? Thank you. That's good. I think we're good. All right. Oh, I gave instructions right here. I just have to read that. So we're rolling the 20-sided die. We're going to do this. Now, what are the possible rolls for a 20-sided die?
Oh, 1 to 20.
1 to 20, right? So we're going to create a function here called roll count. Not a function, I'm sorry, a list called roll count. And then we're going to do this I'm going to call it a better way here in a few minutes. So we'll create roll count. This will be an empty list. I'll go ahead say for I in range of 1 to 21. That'll give me values. Actually, I'm lying. Let's go 0 to 20. And then I'm going to go ahead and say roll count at bucket I is equal to 0. So I'll create a list with a whole bunch of zeros in it for me to count my number of things. All right, so at bucket 0 of that list, I currently have a 0, and that's going to be my number of ones that I roll. At bucket 1 of that list, I currently have a 0. That's going to be my number of 2s that I roll. Okay? Then I'm going to roll the dice 10,000 times. Each time through, we're going to have a variable here called the roll, and that's going to equal the result of my roll, right? So that'll be some number between 1 and 20. And then I'll say roll count at bucket the roll minus 1 is equal to roll count at bucket the roll minus 1 plus 1. And then I'll print out roll count. All right, that's it. So let's run this, and then we'll talk through what that guy does. What row? What do I do? Index out of range. Oh, I have to append to this guy a bunch of zeros. We saw that last time. There we go. So, roughly 500 of each of them.
Yeah, I'd say 60.
Yeah. So that seems to be seemingly well distributed. Okay. So what did I do here? Well, I had my dice, my 20-sided dice, created one of those. I went ahead and created a list. Started off as the empty list. Then I went through and I went ahead and filled that list up with 20 zeros. So bucket 0 was a 0, bucket 1 was a 0, bucket 2 was a 0. Those are going to be my counts for each of the rolls. All right? So I'm going to store the number of ones that I roll in bucket 0 of roll count. I'm going to store the number of 2s that I roll in bucket 1 of roll count. I'm going to store so I stored in the bucket the roll minus 1. That's where that guy came from. So I'm storing my 1s in bucket 0. A 1 minus 1 is 0. I'm storing my 5s in bucket 4. 5 minus 1 is 4. So on and so forth. All right, so I started all those off at 0, so I'm ready to add stuff to them. Then I did something 10,000 times. What did I do? I rolled the dice. I remembered that particular roll inside of this variable called the roll. And then I went ahead and I added 1 to my roll count at position the roll minus 1. And then in the end, I just printed out my roll count, which shows the number of rolls I had for each of those guys. Questions about that? Okay, so let's look at some other ways of doing this. I'm going to create roll count to be a dictionary. I'm going to go from 1 to 21, so this should be 1 to 20. And I'm going to say roll count at position I is equal to a 0. Right, so let's just look at this. So I'm just going to print out roll count here. Ay, ay, ay. Don't give me the option unless you're going to make it work. All right, so I have all of my buckets in here, and now they're all zeros, right? Then I'll make my roll. I'll say roll count at bucket the roll is equal to roll count at bucket the roll plus 1. And then I'll go ahead and print out roll count. So I rolled 519 ones, 444 twos, 499 threes, so on and so forth. So what's the difference between a list and a dictionary?
Dictionaries have they have something associated with already. So like instead of having like an index, it could be anything. We have either in this case we made a number. It's a name value pair.
Okay. So in a much older language like Perl, dictionaries were called something called associative arrays. We are associating a value or associating a key with a value. Okay. So I'm creating a key inside of this dictionary for all of my possible rolls. I have a key for ones, a key for twos, a key for threes, so on and so forth. Okay. Then I'm going through and I'm making each roll, and then I'm just grabbing the value that that's currently associated with that particular kind of roll, with that key. And I'm adding 1 to it, storing the result back in there. That make sense? Now I want to make sure that this language supports this in Python 3. I think it probably does. Oh, ++ is not supported. Interesting. Let's see if this is supported so I could teach about this. Yep, that guy's supported. All right, so let me show you. Let me back up this off here. I'm going to show you a shorter way of writing this line. So that's this line here and this line here mean the same thing. This is a compound operator. Plus equals says, go ahead and after this equal sign, insert the name of the variable that I have on the left-hand side. So this guy right here is shorthand for this line up here. Roll count at the roll plus equals 1 is equal to roll count at the roll is equal to roll count plus roll count at bucket the roll plus 1. So it's saving me from having to type this guy an extra time. Make sense? So in Python 3, what do we have? Do we have like an inc? Roll count at bucket the roll. That's what I'm expecting it to be. What's Python 3's equivalent of ++? Well, only the compound operator. Whatever. So we'll put that plus equals in there as our current solution. All right, so does it make sense what I'm doing here with the dictionary? So rather than having to do that -1 with the list, I'm able to keep track of the number of roles for each of those particular entries. How many ones were there? Started off at 0, keep adding 1 to it. How many 2s? So on and so forth. So a dictionary is really probably the better tool for solving this problem. How many of you in here happen to solve it with a dictionary? 0. You solved it with a who? List count? Because you went through and you filled up a list with 10,000 roles, right? So here let's do it the hardest way. Okay. let's do it let's do it a particularly, let's call it bad way. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and leave this code here for right now. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to create a list called the roles. So this will be equal to an empty list. Then I'll say for I in range 0 to 10,000. So I'm going to say the roles at, let's say the roles.append d20.roll. So I will create a list filled with 10,000 things, right? So I have 10,000 total roles. Then what I want to do is I want to count how many of each of those roles did I have. I'm going to write myself a little function up here. So I'm going to say def count roles. And this guy is going to take in my list of roles, and it's going to take in the role that we're counting. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and create a sum. Starts off at 0, and we're going to say for num in list if num is equivalent to role sum plus equals 1. Then I'll return sum. All right, so what count roles will take in is I'll give it the list of all my roles, and then I might pass it, I want to know how many 1s are in there. Okay, and it's going to go through, it's going to start off, I found 0 1s. It's going to go through every element in my list. It'll ask, is the current element I'm looking at the element that you were looking for? If it is, I'll add 1 to my sum. In the end, we'll go ahead and return the sum. So count roles will give me the number of this value found in this collection. So then what I'll do is down here, well, here, I'll just write it after this. So for I in range 1 to 21, so that'll get me my 1 through 20. I'll go ahead and say print 1s and I'll concatenate that with the string version of what I call this guy, count roles passing it I. Let's get rid of that for right now. All right, so I have no roles. Now I have 10,000 roles. Then I'm going to go through all the possible roles between 1 and 20. And this shouldn't be 1s. This should be the string version of I concatenated with, we'll put a little apostrophe S there. Actually, apostrophe S might end up being a problem. Let's see if it is. I'll show you the escape character. So this will be whatever I is, followed by an S, followed by the string version of whatever count roles returns for the value I'm looking for. So I'm asking here, I also need to pass it my list, which was called the roles. All right, so count roles takes 2 elements. It takes me my list of all my roles, as well as the value I want it to count inside that list. So the first time through, I'll say, tell me how many 1s are in my list of roles. Next time through, I'll say how many 2s are in my list of roles, so on and so forth. Okay? And then I'll print it out kind of pretty print like this. And I can, so let me just do this. Get rid of all those things. Did not like my, oh. No, it did not like guessing this thing. Can't assign to a, where'd that come from? Was that all my pasting stuff? Oh, it's called count roles. Oh, this is called the roles, not roll count. I'm mixing two separate solutions together here. There we go. So there's my 1s through my 20s. So that would be another way of doing that. But this would be far less efficient, right? Because in this case, I'm rolling and storing 10,000 individual rolls. Then I'm going to go through and I'm going to count how many 1s did I find in that list of 10,000. Then I'm going to find out how many 2s did I find in that list of 10,000. All the way up to how many 20s did I find in that list of 10,000. Printing each of those out here. And this code doesn't need to be in here. That was all. I basically copied and pasted it, or I pasted my stuff like in the middle of my for loop for some reason. All right, so the amount of code this took wasn't really any more code, but we can certainly see we're going through here a lot more times, right? Does that mean this is a bad solution? Yeah, it's relatively slow, but from our perspective, did it seem slow at all? It seemed to run instantaneously, didn't it? Yeah, no problem. Okay, so if this solution makes sense to you, and one of those other solutions did not make sense to you, use this solution. At some point in the future, if you're solving a problem where speed really, really, really makes a difference, hopefully by then you'll be an experienced enough programmer where you will understand why this is an inefficient or kind of a poor solution to the problem. But until then, an inefficient correct solution is always going to be better than a very efficient bad solution or wrong solution. Make sense? All right, questions about this one? Go ahead.
Like when you're comparing, let's say, the regular list to the dictionary, you say it's more,
Well, for this one, the better solution would probably be the dictionary. But those are significantly closer. Performance-wise, those are going to be pretty similar. At that point, the reason the dictionary is better is because the dictionary allows me to specifically say, this is how many 1s I had, how many 2s I had, as opposed to having to do that weird thing where I'm storing my 1 count in bucket 0, storing my 2 count in bucket 1, so on and so forth. That type of thing. So you're kind of having to make some assumptions about what that list holds. This is almost the reason for creating your own object, right? So, I mean, objects allow us to associate things with our objects. So we can have a single object, like in this case we have roll, and a roll has a number of sides. Well, we could have an object called I don't know, like a counter or something like that. And that guy would allow us to put in, record this in this position, and then we wouldn't have to be doing that math for subtract 1 from the current bucket and things like that. We can store it all inside of an object, and we don't care how it's internally represented. We're just storing value variable counts. Go ahead.
What about if we start set the rolls equal to -1 first and 0 down after that? So -1 is in the 0 bucket.
Well, you could. Yeah, but then now all of a sudden, if somebody looks at your output, they're going to say, "What's this -1?" See what I'm saying? I mean, that's fine. It's not an inaccurate solution. You still did your counts for 1 through 20, but now you have this like strange -1 sitting in bucket 0, just as a placeholder, so you didn't have to do your -1, which is fine. It solved the problem. Okay, just if you came back to that code in 6 months, it might be a little bit unclear why you're subtracting 1 until you stared at it for a minute or two, to kind of remind yourself, like, oh, this is why I had to subtract 1, or this is why I didn't have to subtract 1 this time, and this is what that -1 means. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So questions about any of these solutions? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I still have one of these other guys saved. Guess I can just rate it again real quick. So we'll do so here's one possibility. I'll go ahead and do my dictionary solution. So here, we'll put a little comment here. So this is the inefficient solution, but correct. Then we'll call this, we'll have our list solution. We'll just put all of them in here. So list solution, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a list of roles. It's going to start off being the empty list. Then for I in range 0 to 20, list of roles dot append a 0. So we'll fill it up with a bunch of zeros. Then we'll say for I in range 0 to 10,000. So we'll roll 10,000 times. Each time through, we're going to store the roll. Then we're going to say list of roles at bucket the roll -1 plus equals 1. And we'll go ahead and print out list of roles. So that's that solution. And then our dictionary solution, we're going to have our dictionary of roles is going to be equal to that. That's an empty dictionary. Then for I in range 0 to 20, dictionary of roles at bucket I is equal to 0. Then for I in range 0 to 10,000, the roll is equal to d20.roll. Then we'll say dictionary of roles at position the roll plus equals 1. And then after that for loop, we'll print out dictionary of roles. So those are 3 different solutions to this problem that all produce what should be pretty similar. My dictionary one. Oh. This is 1 to 21, right? For dictionaries, we didn't need to do the 0 thing. We're going to keep track of all our 1s to 20. So here's our inefficient one, but probably the output looks prettier.
Yeah.
Here's our list version, where bucket 0 is the number of 1s I rolled, bucket 19 is the number of 20s I rolled, and then here's my dictionary version. All right, go ahead.
Why were there different results in the...
Because the random number generator generated different random numbers as we kept going through. So just because we rolled 500 ones the first time doesn't mean that the second time we rolled 10,000 times, we wouldn't roll 430 ones instead. All right, any other questions on this? Go ahead and throw this up on Slack. Whatever. Okay, so we've gotten some pretty good practice with our dice roller stuff, rolling some dice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now, what are some things we might want to do with our dice roller? Let's just get rid of a bunch of this stuff. So now, if you are somebody, let's get rid of this count rolls thing too, just get it out of the way. Now, we mentioned last time, if you're somebody who is playing like tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and things like that, sometimes you're rolling just a d20, or sometimes you're rolling a d10 or a d4 or something like that. But more often than not, when you're rolling a dice, it's like if you're about to attack a monster. Maybe your sword does a d6 plus 2 damage or something like that, right? Because you have this kind of like formula for the amount of damage that your thing is doing. So you might want to create a dice. Maybe you call this guy the attack roll, and maybe this guy is a dice built using a. So maybe we're going to say we want it to be a 6 plus a d6 plus a 2. And probably d6 needs to be in quotes like that. So we want to create something like that. Or maybe it's even 1d6 plus 2. Because sometimes you might have a more powerful weapon that you roll a 3d6 plus 2. Something like that. All right. So you might have this string here. Now, we might want to put this entire thing as a string. Because what this guy is going to try to do is it's going to try to do, well, it's going to say this is an error because we have a string here. We have an int here. What's it going to try to treat this plus sign as here? Concatenation. And it's going to scream and say you can't concatenate a number and a string. So we could put the entire thing inside of our string here. And maybe for our sake right now, we can assume there's no spaces. That'll make the problem a little bit easier for us. Okay, so there's no spaces in here. But now what we want to do is we want to create a dice a different way. We currently have a way of creating a dice with just a number of sides. Now we want to create a dice with a formula. And this formula is going to be how many of these guys. So I want 3 6-sided dice. And then I want to arbitrarily just add 2 to that. If we're thinking about this in Dungeons and Dragons world, you might have a sword that does 3d6 regular damage plus 2 fire damage or something like that, if we want to get super geeky with this. But the point is that we want to create a roll that's a little bit more customized instead of just rolling a d20. Now, we could certainly have built this, right? If we want to roll a d6, we would just say d6 is equal to dice 6. And then what we would do is we would go ahead and say sum is equal to 0 for I in range 0 to 3. Sum plus equals d6 dot roll. And then after this is done, we'll say sum plus equals 2 and then print out sum. So this will effectively roll 3 d6 plus 2. I created 1 d6. I rolled it 3 times, added them all up inside of sum, then tacked on that extra 2 onto that and printed out the total for my sum, which will be that guy. Make sense? But wouldn't it be more convenient for us to be able to say attack roll dot roll up there and have our attack roll that was built this way, built a different way, go ahead and process this string? Make sense? Okay, so how would we go about doing this? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to, instead of having this guy take in sides, we're going to have this guy take in a roll formula. Okay, so if we did pass it 1d6 like that, that would then give us a single 6-sided die for our roll. But we need to now process this roll formula. So effectively, the problem that we are solving here is if I have something that looks like this. If I have something that looks like this, and actually let's make it a 3. I need to be able to extract the 3 from this string. Then I need to be able to extract, basically ignore the D, right? Because I know D means number of sides. Then I need to get the 6. That's going to tell me the number of sides. So that is this many of this sided dice. And then finally, I need to figure out what I'm modifying it with, followed by this piece. Now, let's even make it a little simpler at first. Let's solve one part of the problem first. Let's take out that +2 thing. Let's just allow us to define some multiple of a number of sided dice. So 3d6, for example. And if you want to assume it's always lowercase or always uppercase, you can. Doesn't matter, how you want to write it. So we're going to create our formula, and we're going to walk through this string, one character at a time, and build up another string that's going to ultimately be equal to our answer. How do I get this 3?
That's the number of dice.
Okay, this is the number of dice, but how am I going to extract the number 3 from a string that looks like this?
Well,
Or if you want to look at it, how do I extract the number 203? That's a lot of d6s, but it's still a legal number of d6s. So how do I extract this number as a number from this string?
Split a D.
Okay, well, do we know how to split yet?
No. Well, we don't.
Yeah, can't split it yet. So we're going to have to manually do this. We can only do this with the tools that are in our toolbox. What do you mean change it in the string to something else?
Well, I mean, you can't change to an integer.
Correct.
You can change it to
Well, how could I just get that part of the string? Let's start with that. What if I wanted the string 203? How could I build that? How could I turn that guy into that guy? Or get that piece out of it? We don't know if this is a single 3 or this is a whole bunch of numbers before it, d6.
So we need a way of checking to see if the string index is a number or if it's a
I want to keep reading numbers until what happens?
we hit D.
We hit a D. Go ahead.
Could you create a temporary list and then have it create an if statement if it's A, B, C, or D, or if it's not A, B, C, or D, append it to that new list, and then
Well, first of all, we know this will always be a D. That's the
Yeah.
number of sides.
But I'm just saying for that first part, you know what I'm saying or not?
Well, these guys will definitely be numbers if they're not a D.
Yeah, I'm saying keep appending numbers in the beginning until you reach the D,
Yep.
and then turn that new list or new string into a list, and then have that be our number.
Okay. You seem to be, I think you're onto something here. You seem to be bouncing back and forth between saying list and saying string.
Yeah.
What am I building here? Am I building up a list that contains a 2, then a 0, then a 3, or am I building up a string that contains a 2, then a 0, then a 3?
A list would make more sense.
Guess the other way.
String.
Okay. What happens if I say that on the string 203? I'll get the number 203, won't I?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so if I built up a string, and how do we build strings? String concatenation. So I would start off with the empty string, then I would start walking through my formula until I finally bumped into a D. When I bump into a D, I know I'm done building up my string for number of dice. That make sense? So let's dump this up here. So roll formula. If I move this above here. And we say we're going to go ahead and pass in that formula here, or we could just pass in the string directly. But ultimately what's coming into our constructor here for dice is something that looks like that. The number of dice followed by a D followed by the number of sides. Make sense? All right. So let's get those two pieces extracted then. All right. So there are two different things that I'm trying to build up here. I'm building up, actually, let's just do this. Number of dice. This is going to start off as the empty string. And then number of sides. That's also going to start off as the empty string. So now I want to go through this string roll formula, starting at bucket 0 and go all the way up to, but not including when I first find a D. How long will it be until I find a D? Might be 1, might be 50, might be 5,000, right? So what kind of loop lends itself to a problem where we don't necessarily know how many times we're going to spin? While loop. All right, so we're going to start a count, so maybe we'll call it pause, off at 0. Then we'll say while pause is less than the length of roll formula. Actually, do we have a function that tells us the first occurrence of the D in the string?
We probably do.
Let's go back to our, well, let's roll it. Let's write it this way first.
Yeah.
And then we'll go back, because I think we have the equivalent of like an index of, or like a find or something like that. It's in our keynote.
We also have find or string dot find.
That returns the first place where it's in there, or -1 if it wasn't found.
Yeah, -1 if not found, it looks like.
All right, well, we'll write it that way here in a second, but let's assume I didn't know I had that function. I didn't know I had a function that I could search through the string and find the position of the first occurrence. Well, I could write the function myself. All right, or I could just say, look, I know I'm going to bump into a D somewhere in here, but the worst case scenario is I might have to go all the way to the end of this string. Each time through here, I'm going to ask the question. I'm going to say if. Now I'm interested in roll formula at position pause. So if roll formula at position pause is equal to, if we assume it's a capital D, if I'm looking at a capital D, that means that I'm done. So as long as I am not looking at a capital D, I want to collect things inside of number of dice. So I'll say number of dice is equal to number of dice concatenated with roll formula at bucket pause. Then we'll say pause plus equals 1. If I'm in this else, that means I am looking at a D. If I'm looking at a D, I need to increment pause because we want to skip the D. But I also need to get out of this loop. Okay? So we'll go ahead and say pause plus equals 1. And then we'll break out of the loop. So when we're sitting here, we have number of dice filled with the right string value. All right, so let's see that here. I still name my variable D20, it doesn't matter. So as I'm going through here, I'm going to go ahead and prove that number of dice has the right value in it. If I build a dice using my formula, number of dice should be the string 203. Okay, if this is working. So there's my 203. I extracted that first part of it. All right, so we have the number of dice here. Next thing I need to do is I need to go from pause to the end of the string, but now pause is significantly farther down, right? Pause started off at 0, but pause was changing throughout this while loop. So now pause, in our case here, pause was 0, then it was 1, then it was 2, then it was 3, then it was 4. So I'm sitting right here with pause, ready to read in my next portion of that string.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now I need to get the number of sides. So we're going to say while pause less than roll formula. So this should take me to the end of the string, which should be where my number of sides is. I'll go ahead and say number of sides is equal to number of sides concatenated with roll formula at position pause. And then pause plus equals 1. I'll go ahead and print out number of dice. I'm sorry, not number of sides here. Oh, no, it is number of sides. I'll print out number of dice, and I'll print out number of sides. And that should prove that we were able to extract those two pieces of information from our string. So we should get a 203, and then we should get a 6. So there's my 203, and there's my 6. Now, those guys are currently strings. Now, will this work if I pass a much bigger number there?
Yeah.
Sure. Don't have to change anything. It's a big die. Yeah. In fact, if you've ever seen a 100-sided die, they're almost smooth.
Oh,
So,
really?
so that number of sides, you have to make that extremely large in order to have any sort of edges, like the chance of it landing on a side. Otherwise, it's a marble. is what it is. It just keeps rolling forever. Right? But it's technically in our program a legal number of sides. We're just thankful we don't have to do the manufacturing process for this. All right. So what we want to do here is we want to store the appropriate values such that when we call roll, it rolls the right number of dice the right number of times. So then in here, we want to make roll work for our new formula version of dice. So in this case here, if I were to call d20.roll, it should roll, here, let's put in a number that I can read, 203 20-sided dice, spitting out the final number. Make sense? All right, so I've given you a starting point here that you can work off of. So now you need to finish this object. So a couple of lines in here, couple of lines in here, and just very specific couple of lines. All right, questions, comments, concerns, bribes. See everybody on Friday.